Welcome to Mikes and Mayhem with Jenna and Maddie Morrow.
I'm Jenna,
And I'm Maddie.
and we have mics, and as always, we are here to bring you mayhem.
Yes, 100%, 24/7, all the time. In this character deep dive, we are going to be talking about Joe from the anime Sk8 the Infinity. We decided to split up the Matcha Blossom ship, which is the ship name for Joe and Cherry. So we are going to start with the matcha before the blossom.
Right, drink your matcha before your cherry blossom tea. Is that a tea?
I think so.
Well, if it's not, it is now. First here on Mics and Mayhem. If you haven't seen Skate the Infinity, where have you been? Just kidding, just kidding. We love you anyway. But please save this video and come back to us once you have watched it, and then you will fully appreciate the absolute deep nonsense we dive into today. And if you are a skate fan, then you know how rich Joe's lore is.
Joe is not his actual name. It's more
It
of a
actually
like
is.
it's his name is not Joseph.
It's Joseph M. Blossom, his given
No.
Christian name.
No, he is Joe the six-pack skater, but he's way more commonly known as Joe, but his name is Kojiro, but the only person who ever calls him that is Cherry.
His husband, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny because the first time I put on Skate for my sister, she hadn't watched it, and I was like, "Let's watch the first episode." And, in the intro, all the characters come across with, like, the big, label of their names, and it's like, Longa, Reki, Cherry Blossom, Joe, and she was like, "Joe? That's it? That's it. That's Joe."
Yep, he's just Joe.
He's
I'm just
he's
Joe.
just he, like, literally would sing that. He'd be really upset because everybody thinks he's just a hot dude whose job is beach, but he's like, "So much more than that." And Cherry would definitely perpetuate that stereotype. He'd be like, "He's just a buff Ken doll.
Charring his chesticles for locals in heat.
Ooh, what a thirsty gorilla."
That's his job is just whatever this is.
His job is lounge. I just love, like, his biggest bully is Cherry, is his best friend slash husband, is his biggest bully nemesis.
Yep. Yep. It's ridiculous, that's for sure. But anyhow,
This is where the mayhem comes in, fellas.
yep.
Yeah, so we have quite a bit to say about Joe, but if you watched our previous deep dive on Reki and Longa, it is not not that not that's not detailed, not that long. With Reki and Longa, we obviously had two individual characters to talk about and tie them into the overarching theme of them together as a pair. This one is just, like we said earlier, Joe.
Yes. Yeah, and Joe has a little bit more to him than even, like, the MCs because they give us some flashbacks of, like, his high school days, so we kind of get to see where he came from and where S kind of started, as he is one of the founders of S, along with Cherry and Adam, and so we kinda get to see the 3 of them, what it was like when they were in high school around the same age as Reki and Longa, so that's kind of another reason why we decided to split them up, was because there's more to them.
And I believe at the time of the show in the timeline, Joe, Cherry, and Adam are like their late 20s, right? So they're about 10 years older than Longa and Reki.
Yeah, I believe they're supposed to be 26, Shadow's 24, and then the grown-ups are 26.
That's so sad. Like, you're the grown-ups and they're in their mid to like barely late 20s. They're like 10 years younger than I am right now, and I'm not a grown-up.
Right.
Oh, goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
Joe has like a flourishing business and everything, and he's like 26 years old.
I know, man. That's
Ugh.
what I wanna pick his brain and be like, "How did you become the owner and runner of a restaurant at such a young age?" But his answer would be, "It's anime." Like,
Yeah, that would be his answer.
Mhm.
But yeah, Joe, the thing that is really cool about him is that if we just pulled up a picture of him right now and showed you, this is the character and he's got like his shirt off and the abs and the whole thing, you'd be like, "Oh, that's a himbo. He's probably really stupid. He's probably just like meat for brains." But what I love about Joe is he actually is nothing. He's the definition of don't judge a book by its cover. He's like nothing like you would think off of your knee jerk reaction.
Right, yeah, he is definitely the more caring character. He's very empathetic and, like, sensing that, kinda plays into his personality type. If you guys watched our video on Reiki and Longo, we discussed the MBTI personality types, and again, these are open for interpretation, but he is labeled as an ESTP, so he is extroverted, he's the loud bisexual. He's the loud, excited one who, is more likely to have conversations with people. He is very dramatic in a way. He's action oriented and he's really good at like perceiving, like he can read people. He is more of like the parental figure of the adults in this show, even though he might not look it, but he like has been around the block, like he has lived life even though he's only 26, he's gone through his ups and downs. He understands what the younger characters are going through and can kind of sense and give them the direction that they need, which looks different depending on who he's talking to.
Right, and, again, going back to, like, if I threw up a picture of Joe and Cherry on your screen, which maybe we will, if you look at Joe and Cherry side by side, and of course, like, we're not getting into Cherry in this one, he's gonna be our next deep dive, but, like Reki and Longa, the 2 do go together, so it's very hard to talk about Joe without bringing traits of Cherry in, but if you threw up a picture of Joe and Cherry, you would probably think, "Oh, Cherry is the more." He's designed to look more, I would say, feminine. He's got the very long hair. He's beautiful. He's gorgeous. And you would think, "Oh, he's the more like motherly, caring kind of one." He is mean. He is the mean one of the group. He literally hits a kid. He is like not afraid to hit a kid. He is like, to me, Cherry is the definition of like your father wanted to have kids and I didn't. Like, and Joe is just the one who is so, nurturing and caring, and he's takes the boys under his wing, and he guides them and mentors them, and Jerry is just like, "Please get out of my business right now."
Yes. Yeah, like they all show up at Joe's restaurant and he's kind of like, "Okay," but he doesn't kick them out. Like he feeds them, even when they all ask for ridiculous things, he feeds them. He lets them use like I like to headcanon that they use Joe's restaurant as like a safe space. So if the kids, right, are like stressed out or upset or they need like what's it called? I think it's called like third place, right? Is that like the term for like when you go to work and you go home, you have that like third space that's like important to you that you can go to relax that's not home. Correct me in the comments if that's not what that means. But like I feel like Joe would willingly let the kids come and eat at his restaurant or like, have a piece of garlic bread. you
And
know?
it's funny. It's funny because I know you said, like, you headcanon it, but I don't really think it's so much as a headcanon, it's basically canon, like, they do go there, they use it as their I mean, like, I don't wanna say base of operations because, like, they're not on a mission, but kind of in a
Yeah.
sense, like, when they're, like, plotting to figure out how to skate against Adam, they all go to Joe's. They all go to Joe's restaurant. This is kind of, they go there more than they're at Dope Sketch. Like, Dope Sketch is really more a place of work in the anime, at least. Like, of course, Oka is nurturing as well and everything, but Joe's is where they always go. It's where they go to solve problems. It's where they go to get nourished in more than just a sense of food. It's really nourishment in such a multifaceted way.
Oh, yeah, that's very true. That's so true. Looking at Joe, you know, he's I mean, he's a womanizer, like, let's be real here, like, he's constantly seen with, like, 2 women on his, you know, 1 on each arm. He is all about the strength and power of his muscles, and that's kind of his thing, but he's a big softy for sure, and he is willing to provide that sense of, like, peace and, like, calming for the other characters. Maybe not so much Cherry. I mean, he kind of does, but, like, more on the down low because 'cause they're more often seen, like, fighting or, like, not getting it looks like they don't get along, but in the moments they do, it's always a very calm conversation for the few seconds that they actually can talk about things without one-upping each other or reminding each other of something terrible that the other did. Uh,
No, he's very in those moments where it's just them and they're not putting on, like, I feel like that's an act. They put that act, they do fight. They're jerks, you know. But that's always in front of a crowd or in front of the boys or in front of somebody that's watching, because in the moments that they're alone together, it's always very tender. Like, you have, you know, after Cherry gets hurt at S against Adam, you have this whole view of how Joe treats him. Like, even okay, so even at the beginning of the beef between Adam and Cherry, Joe watching is very intense. He's not like, "Oh, what Cherry's like an idiot. Look at him go, blah blah blah." He's like on bated breath watching him so concernedly, and then when Cherry gets hurt, he runs there, he picks him up, the way he holds him is so tender, and even after, like, after Cherry's home from the hospital and he's at Joe's, you have that scene, that I guess, post-credit kinda thing, you're right? You would say
yeah,
post-credit
yeah,
scene?
yeah, it's a post-credit scene.
Yeah, the post-credit scene where Cherry's all bandaged up and he's sleeping on the bar, I guess you could call it, the
Mhm.
bar, the restaurant, and Joe is so sweet, and he's like, "Well, we've got each other, right?" And it's just such a sweet and tender moment that it shows those are the true that's the true, dynamic between the 2 of them. It's actually very, at least, you know, talking from Joe's side of it, it's very caring and nurturing and, tender.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, and we see a little bit of that as well before we get the flashback. You know, in the episode where we get to see them as teenagers, they go to the spot, right, where they're like, you know, "I wonder where it all went wrong, blah, blah, blah," and it's a very, like, quiet conversation, a very quiet, calming, like not necessarily a calming moment because it's coming before something intense. It's like the calm before the storm, I guess. You know, and we see the way Joe talks to Cherry. And then in the flashback, when they are in high school, we still see Joe's concern for Cherry's relationship, I guess, with Adam. And we'll again talk about Cherry another time. But like you can see like the concern, you know, that he like kind of that doesn't I don't know if he had like foresight into what Adam was going to become, but I feel like it plays into his perception of, you know, his ability to read people, to where he was like, okay, this guy is dangerous, you know. And I know Cherry saw it too, but I think Cherry was looking at him with rose colored glasses, whereas Joe was like, this isn't safe, like this isn't great. And then that mindset moves into when they're trying to beef with Adam when Joe is like, "Well, I want to race him too," and I always wonder what a race between Joe and Adam would have looked like because we never got to see it.
Oh. Yeah, you're right. I didn't even think of that.
Mhm.
I think it would be just as emotionally charged as Adam and Cherry, but in a different way. Like Adam and Cherry are clearly racing with really heightened emotions and past baggage coming out at that race. Joe's emotional baggage is more related to Cherry. Like he saw how Cherry was treated, he saw what happened. So it's more almost like again, a protective, nurturing sort of thing. And what's really interesting about Joe is it kind of ties into his sign. You know, he is July 7th is his birthday and he's Cancer, and Cancers are all about being emotional and sensitive, and a lot of times you read about Cancer, it will tell you, like, they are the sign that has, like, almost you could say psychic abilities, like, obviously, they're not, like, you know, like, reading your mind, but it has to do with perception and empathy and, you can relate to somebody on a level that maybe another person doesn't tap into, and that basically is Joe through the entire series from teenage years to the present.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, because he relates to both Longa and Reki. Like, we see him in 2 separate episodes, encouraging both of them, but in very different ways because they need encouragement in very different ways. So, like, at the beach, you know, Reki is more concerned about falling behind and not being a good enough skater. And, he wants to learn some of Joe's tricks, and Joe is very sweet with him. And, he gives him a little spiel about, skating and stuff. And then with Longa, it, he has that talk with like, skaters are idiots, there's no like cash prize, right? We just do this because we love it, but it makes us fools, right? And Longa's like, "Well, that's what we're doing right now." And Joe's like, "Well, yeah, because we're both morons." Like,
Right.
like he like relates to him. And then when Longa's board breaks at the end of their race, at first Joe was like, "It's just a skateboard. Like, you can get a new one." And then when he sees how distraught Longa is because his board broke, and I know we touched on this in our deep dive with Reki and Longa too. Longa's like, "But Reki made this for me. Like, what do you mean get a new board? Like, no, like that's not what he needed." And Joe was like, "I know what you need," and
I
he's like, "I
I
I
know
know
what
what you
you are.
are." Like,
I know what you are. You're
"I
you're
know
just
what you are." Just like me. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so he tells him like, "Well, then go fix it. Go do what you need to do." And he encourages Longa in chasing after Reki, and then he does it again when they're in the hospital with Cherry after he gets hurt, and Reki, like, freaks out and runs away, and Longa's like, "Oh my gosh, like, Reki was here," and Joe's like, "Go get him," like, I think it's actually in episode 9 when Longa's board breaks, and he tells him, like, "Go get him, kid." It's such
that's ridiculous.
it's so not something you would tell someone if it was a friendship. He knows, Joe knows, and it's that playing into, like you said, with his astrology sign, but also his personality type. He's very sensing and perceptive, and that's that's who he is. And it also plays into his color theory being green. Green is compassion and healing and optimism. Like, he he can it's all comes back to that, like, sensing, like, he, like, understands people.
Right, like, and green, the color of nature, the color of growth and spring and which is kinda funny now that I say that, I say spring. I didn't think of this earlier, but, cherry blossoms, when do they bloom? In the spring. Anyway, going back to his zodiac sign, like, there is a lot, and when I was doing the research for this particular episode, I was kind of, not shocked, but I was amazed at how, to a T, he fits the, I guess, characteristics, that's the word I'm looking for, the
Mhm.
characteristics of the Cancer sign. You know, their strengths are they're tenacious, they're highly imaginative, they're loyal. That is a very big one. They're emotional, sympathetic, they're persuasive. Every single one of those absolutely nails Joe. Like, he is every one of those to a T. And they tend to like things that are art-based activities. They like to help loved ones, and something that one of the quotes that I wrote down from my little research into cancers was they like, quote, "a good meal with friends."
Wow.
And yeah.
Yeah.
It's very much him, and they are a very, if not the most, probably the most family-based sign. They are very in tune to the bond of what it means to be a family. And cancers are all about finding fulfillment in their personal lives as opposed to profession or, I guess, no, I guess like profession is all I'm looking for there. They're very, very concerned with having that fulfillment of family. And cancers make very, very great parents, which is Joe. He is literally the parent of the group.
Yeah, he's definitely, you know, not only is he daddy, but he's dad. Like, he's
Did not
I
expect that, but it's very true.
and so, like, he as much as, like, Mia messes with him, like, in the beach episode where he's like, "Daddy, daddy, don't take," he, like, it totally messes with Joe, and Joe gets, like, really upset about it, right? Like, because Mia ruined his chance with the hot girls on the beach. But he's still so sweet to the kids, and in that beach episode, Cherry even calls them "the kids," and kind of harkens back to when you mentioned, Cherry being the one who's like, "Your father wanted kids and I didn't," kind of a thing, because Joe brings them all to where Cherry is conducting business, and he's like, "Hey, look who I brought, like, let's all have a meal together, right?" And Cherry's like, "Ugh, you brought the kids," like, so
They
upset
are
about
married.
it.
They're married.
They are, and they do, like, complement each other so well because, like, green and pink are very springy colors. They work really well together in, like, decor. Like, people constantly use, like, green and pink together, and green is a very calming, relaxing color, and it also uses the, like, energy from yellow. Because how do you make green? Blue and yellow. Well, guess whose colors in the show
Hmm.
are blue and yellow? Reki and Longa, so he kind of is a combination of I don't wanna say he's a combination of Reki and Longa, but he's that combination of the cool blue and the energetic yellow because I feel like he is supposed to be a parallel for Reki if if Reki and Longa had gone down the same road as Cherry and Joe did, which Joe saw kind of happening, which is another reason why I believe he was totally encouraging Longa to, like, go fix your relationship with Reki because Joe saw Cherry being pursued by Adam when they were teenagers, and then he saw what happened when Cherry couldn't keep up, and then he was horribly injured as an adult by Adam. And so Longa is that current pursuit, or he was, like, in up until the final episode, and Reki was the one watching on as his best friend was being pursued by someone who was ultimately dangerous, just in a, very wild, chaotic way. and I really am excited to talk about Adam when we get there eventually because that's gonna be a long episode. We're just gonna warn you now that I feel like we're gonna talk about Adam just as long as we talked about Reki and Longa combined because
Well, the thing about Adam is that you can't talk about him alone. He comes along with Joe and Cherry. You cannot talk about him. So it's gonna kinda be a threefold episode when we get to Adam. It's just impossible.
yeah, yeah, 100%. So, anywho, and then Joe is also like the chaotic bisexual. And let's be real here, like Joe and Reki are like the bisexual icons in this series, and he is, reminding Reki in the beach episode, like, you don't want to end up alone. Like, don't do this alone. Like, that reminder of when Reki kept saying, this is for fun. We're doing this for fun. Well, Joe is stepping in with that extra reminder of, like, yeah, it's fun, but you don't want to do the fun thing by yourself because you're going to end up like us, and he doesn't want that. Like, I know Joe and Cherry they don't have like an estranged relationship. Like, they are close, they're best friends, but like there's that trauma from high school that Joe doesn't want Reki to experience.
Right. Like Joe and Cherry obviously made it through the whole Adam situation. And, I hope the OVA touches on this because I know it's going to be their teenage years. Like, how did they get from, you know, Adam leaving for America to where they are now? Like, they obviously got through all this. And, if you look at the relationship between Adam and Cherry, it's kind of like, not kind of, it is like a bad breakup, like a toxic ex situation. It'll be interesting to see how they picked up the pieces from the destruction that was Adam. He really did come in like a hurricane and leave just the same way. So I would love to see how they got from the remnants of that to where they are now because obviously it worked. Whatever they did worked because they have fond memories of high school that they don't mention Adam in. Like, "Oh, remember when we went on that trip to LA and you did stupid crap?" Like, it's a thing that is mentioned throughout the series. Like, they managed to have fond memories that are from their youth and young adulthood that don't involve the trauma too. So I wonder how they did that, and I would love to see that in the OVA.
Yeah. Yeah, because we only get glimpses of high school and then we can kind of, you know, we can try to fill in the pieces of what happened, in their high school years. I want to know what made Joe want to bulk up so much.
Oh, I have a headcanon about that. I have
you know,
and, like, I've considered it to be canon at this point because it's funny. I think it came up with, when actually Maddie and I and our friend Chelsea cosplayed the young Joe, Cherry, and Adam, and I remember talking about it when we were cosplaying them, like, "Why do you think he went from Joe was from such as, like, a little twig to this big buff gorilla?" And I'm like, "He one time heard Cherry say, 'I really like buff guys,' and said, 'Say less, friend. I'm gonna go get real buff.'" Canon.
yes, yeah. Yeah, because, a lot of the attention that Cherry gives him is centered around his looks. Like, oh, he's charring his chesticles for locals in heat. Like, oh, he's such a buffoon because all he's doing is using his strength and his muscles. And, he's showing off, right? Like, he uses a lot of skating moves that use his muscles. So his muscles aren't just for show, he's actually using the strength that he worked so hard for. But it's just interesting that we don't know why he chose to go that route other than the silly canon, head canon that Jenna came up with. Because in high school, Joe was the preppy one. He was the one who he didn't wear his uniform properly, but probably more so than Cherry did, because
Oh, Cherry was
Cherry
bad.
yeah, and Cherry had the lip rings and he had the piercings, and
Messy hair, messy long hair.
Yeah, and Joe was more put together, and now it's kind of reversed. Not Joe doesn't have piercings or anything as an adult, but he is definitely the more chaotic one. He's the one who's taking more risks, especially opening a restaurant. That's pretty risky. Like having a restaurant is not a guaranteed career, whereas Cherry has a much more solid career. He's much more put together. He wears, traditional Japanese clothing versus like jeans and a button down shirt like Joe does. So
The
they do
extra,
kind of,
extra small extra,
yes,
extra small t-shirt
yeah.
like Joe
It was
does.
the only size that they had left was an extra small.
No, no, he said, "I wear double XL, get me a double XS."
Yep. Yeah. So it'll be interesting if we get any more of that, from like where that switch kind of happened.
I think I never thought of it the way you just described how Joe gets a lot of the attention from Cherry based on his looks and strength. I never thought of that before, and it's
Mhm.
so true because, is it, Cherry is not intrigued, obviously, he's known Joe for over a decade, but he's, drawn to that aspect of Joe, and going back to where you said Joe is a little more of the risk taker, I think it's funny because Cherry is too, except he hides it better. That's what I love about them is that Cherry's all put together. He's, like you said, in his traditional Japanese clothing. He's got his thriving calligraphy business. He's this prim and proper. Women love him. They all fawn over him. And then the second he turns around, he's smacking a kid. Like he's he's very much also chaotic, but he hides it well.
Mhm.
Joe is just balls to the walls. Joe does not care. What you see is what you get with him, and I love that about Joe.
Yeah, and that's the extrovert. That's like he's not gonna hide like who he is, and it's funny because Cherry wears the mask, right, at S, so it kind of
Mm.
conceals a little bit of who he is, whereas Joe looks exactly the same. Like
Doesn't even have a secret name.
S is supposed to be this top secret, no one's supposed to know about it unless you attend S. You're not supposed to talk about it outside of the race, which they talk about it all the time outside of the course. It's some big rule, but they're just like constantly discussing it. Like, don't talk about Fight Club, but all they do is talk about it. Like, that's all they do. And Joe looks the same. Like, all he does is put a jacket on over his muscles, and that's Joe. Like, he doesn't do his hair different. Like, with Adam, like, he obviously is full. You do not know who he is if you ran into him on the street. You would not know those are the same people. Cherry, a little bit Longa clocks it. He's like, "Hey, wait a minute. That's the same guy I just had a job interview with, right?" Like he got it. Reki gets it. But Joe, like you could walk if you were a skater at S, you could go to see a Loose and be like, that's six pack skater Joe. Like he looks the same. The
And
same.
he'd be like, "What's the chef's name?" And he'd be like, "It's Joe." He doesn't even try to hide his name a little
Well,
bit.
because no one calls him Kojiro. No one does. Like, Cherry
Just
does, I
Cherry.
think, like, twice, maybe, like, when they're actually talking, and then that really, like, quiet moment when he's racing and he's like, "Kojiro."
Kojiro.
Yeah, like,
My
you know,
love.
and Joe does the same thing. He's like, "Karu." Like, he, very rarely calls him by their given names. So it's just interesting that Joe made up S. He's a founder of S, made the rules for this place, but oh, is like the boys ran into him at the restaurant, right, in one of those first few episodes, and Reki's like, "Joe?" And there was no denying it either. Joe did not try to deny it. So, it's the extrovert like, "Oh yeah, you caught me."
Yeah, I wasn't hiding, but you still caught me. And it's funny because that's what gets Reki smacked by Cherry is because he runs into the crowd when Cherry's doing his calligraphy event, and he's like, "Cherry, Cherry!" And Cherry's like, "Excuse me for a minute," and then goes and grabs Reki, and he's like, "Don't you ever call me that in public." So at least, like, he is abiding by the rules they set and very, to the book by, "Please don't reveal my secret identity," even though, like, I think, he's got this long, beautiful pink hair, and there's no one else it could possibly be. Besides that, he's very much like, "Please don't say who I am." Joe's like, "Yeah, that you got me. It's me. I'm Joe."
It is very silly. They're very different people.
Going back to the zodiac signs, Cancer is a water sign and Cherry, he is a fire sign. So that also parallels with Reki Longa because they are water and fire as well. But I feel like it fits Matcha Blossom more because Cherry is, like, hot-headed. He's not yeah, he is hot-headed.
Yeah.
He's more quick to anger, and Joe is
Mhm.
cool. He's calm and collected, and it definitely fits them to a T a little more than Reki and Langa because I feel like Reki and Langa, they share traits too. They are more of a amalgamation of each other. They're more of the two parts of a whole, whereas Joe and Cherry are very distinct things and they clash, but they work?
Yeah, absolutely, and you mentioned the quick to anger thing with Cherry, when they're wanting to challenge Adam or discussing the possibility of both of them challenging Adam, Joe is mad, but he's not, like, yelling about it, whereas Cherry, you can clearly tell how upset he is and how he wants to get revenge, like, he's been holding this grudge for 7 years, like, he has all of this, like, anger, and Joe is like, "Well, I'm gonna race him too because I am also not happy with him." But it's not out of a place of, like, this explosive anger, it's more calm and his emotions are a little more fluid than Cherry.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I get like we're gonna get into Cherry. I know we've mentioned it a few times, but it's funny that he wears the mask at S when I feel like he really wears the mask in real life. The whole idea of Karu is more of a mask than Cherry is because that boiling anger inside you would not expect from this, fancy calligrapher who's very collected and calm. He, why he's, how am I trying to say this? You don't expect it more so, and then when he goes to S, it's like, wow, he really has some stuff to work through. I
Yeah,
think I think
100% agree.
also I think, you can't talk about Joe and I guess Cherry without bringing the beach episode up a little more because it's so wild when you really stop and think about it. I remember I watched the show a few times, and I love the beach episode, it's great. It's literally, like, the definition of an anime beach episode, but, it's silly, you have the whole interaction where you mentioned earlier, Mia is calling Joe, "Daddy, daddy, don't make mommy mad at you," and you pan over and it's, you know, Joe is like, "Ooh, who is this beautiful woman with these gorgeous legs?" And they pan up and it's Cherry, like, Joe, you're wild for that. But it was brought to my attention by you, of course, that Joe and Cherry are on this ferry heading to this island before Shadow and the kids are. So they just happen to run into each other. Why doesn't Joe have a place of his own to stay? What's going on here, guys?
Yeah. Yeah, because the Shadow is bringing, the boys, and he's the chaperone, and he's the one who had, like, a hookup to the really crummy hotel on the island, but they run into Joe and Cherry, who are supposedly there separately, but you never find out why Joe was actually there. Like, Cherry was on a business trip, like, it was made very clear that Cherry was on a business trip. Reki makes it very clear that hot springs are a boomer thing,
Yep.
but they're there for the hot springs. And then Joe is just there. And so I know a lot of us in the fandom believe that Joe and Cherry were there together, because that's the only logical explanation for why Joe would know Cherry's exact like itinerary for what was going on that day and why they all ended up in the same spot. But again, it could just be anime logic. Like I get that too, but there's more. Like nothing in this show I feel like is done by accident. Like we have talked about this a lot. You know, the symbols, the coloring, the way that the characters talk to each other, they're nothing is done by accident. Like it could be an oversight on the writer's part for why Joe was there, but I don't think so. You know, and then Joe knew that that was Cherry. There's no way he didn't know. Joe and Cherry have been friends since childhood. Like they grew up together. So th- he
You know
knew
what his legs look like.
he knew who he was looking at, but you know, for the sake of a show and you know, putting on a show for everyone else to like,
It's so funny when he gets all red in the cheeks and he's like, "Oh, my guy, we know."
we know.
It's so cute. Like, they really are, so cute, and something about Joe, you mentioned, they grew up together, all these things, and with Joe, I feel like more than any other character, there are headcanons the fandom has decided is canon, and I think it's great with Joe. I hope that, like, some of these things wind up getting incorporated since it is an original anime. It doesn't have a source material. Like, one of the accepted, I guess, chronological? I can't think. Canonical, there we go. One of the accepted facts of Joe is at some point, he went to Italy and studied culinary school because he has an Italian restaurant. It's never once stated in the show that that happened. And I think it's funny how like there are certain things about Joe more than any other character that are basically assumed facts.
Mhm. Yeah, well, we know that they're well traveled. Like they have conversations about, you know, going to LA, going to Europe. So it's quite possible that he studied abroad somewhere for having an Italian restaurant in Japan.
Right. And did Cherry go with him? Like all of the discussions too are their stories are together. They
Mhm.
travel together. There's never a story of, "Oh, remember when I was in LA and you were home?" They're always together, the 2 of them. So,
Well, a
I
lot of it is class trips too. A lot of it was school, which is interesting that they like their class trips were going to another country, where I feel like in most anime you hear about class trips where they're like, I mean, I know Skate takes place on Okinawa, but a lot of the time that's where class trips are going is they're going to Okinawa. Like that's like the big thing in high school
the beach.
themed
Right.
anime, but this isn't a slice of life show. So it's interesting, like, well, what class was going to LA? Like, was your preppy high school taking you to abroad? Or were you both in college studying abroad?
I think the fact that there's going to be this OVA about young Matcha Blossom, and I say young loosely because they are still really young, but I mean, like,
Kid, like when they're
teen.
kids, yeah.
Yeah, like teen, I would guess maybe, like, even late teens,
Mhm.
possibly high school, college era. I love that there is gonna be this because maybe we'll get a little bit of this. Like, I think it would be really cool to see them in college as well, like, not necessarily just the high school that we got a flashback of, but, they come together as a pair. So they've been together, like you said, since childhood. It's not a big stretch to imagine we would see, like, them studying abroad maybe together, and they're just so cute and feisty at the same time. And
Yeah.
like we said, we can't deep dive Joe without slightly deep diving Cherry as well because they do come as a set.
Yes. It's the matcha to the blossom.
Yes, Blossom will be next.
Yes.
And Blossom is not Joe's last name.
Well, and yeah, it's not. So, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. I was gonna say
Yeah,
some
I mean,
spoiler things, but we'll talk about it when we get to Cherry.
I wanna know what you're gonna say
Mm,
now.
I will tell you later.
Fine. But I think that really hits every single point we are trying to really get to about Joe. He's a very rich character in more ways than one, and more than just his personality and his physical and these, past tidbits we get. He is, in many senses, the glue that holds the entire cast of characters together. He is the heart and soul, I would say, of the skate crew, and that is kind of funny because isn't soul his, like, trademark thing, right? SOLE?
But I think that means sun, doesn't it?
Shh.
That's his big
He's
tattoo and his skateboard is sun.
he's the heart and soul of the crew.
Yes,
Get
there
it?
you go. Yes. Perfect. I think that's a great way to end this deep dive. I think that was great. That was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. So, that wraps it up here at Mikes and Mayhem, where we're discussing Joe. If you are interested in more deep dives, make sure you like and subscribe. If you have not watched the Reki and Longa deep dive, go back and take a listen or a watch, whichever you prefer. It is a bit long, so it's more like, maybe put us on in the background while you're doing some cleaning or driving or something. But stay tuned for more mayhem. We have lots planned.
Yes, and we won't just be talking about skate, but this is where we're starting with our channel. We both are extremely huge fans of Skate the Infinity. So stay tuned because we will be diving into other fandoms, not just anime, but other anime as well. So if you are, into anything pop culture and you have suggestions for us, please drop it in the comments. Send us a message on Instagram, throw it in a comment on Instagram, whatever. We are very accessible on social media and we would very much welcome any suggestions, comments, and yeah, that's everything, right, Maddie?
Yeah, I think that touches on everything. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.